third part here for this podcast, Dan. Like here, how do you kind of after the fact everything happened now? How you keep yourself prepared? In that, I start with this question: how can a cybersecurity leader here, right, stay up to date and on the latest cybersecurity threats and trends to better prepare for a potential threat or attack?
Yeah, thanks. So Joe, it's very it's a tough thing because things are moving so fast here in 2023 as we start a new year and as we think about all the changes that are constantly happening. Think about ransomware attacks, how they've evolved, and you talk about double extortion and triple extortion. It's not just about encrypting the data and getting money and getting paid back. A lot of times they're selling the data behind the scenes, and there's other types of extortion that are happening. So, I mean, for me, I read a ton, I blog a ton. I encourage people to go to my blogs, Lohrmann on cybersecurity at Government Technology Magazine, govtech.com. I write for CISO Magazine. So I'm constantly trying to learn, educate myself. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this part 3. We cover some of this in parts 1 and 2 in the earlier segments. But, the book, Cyber Mayday and the Day After, is the book we're talking about. It really does give you a list of a lot of different resources and places you can go. But this is constantly evolving. There's so many places to go. I think a lot of people feel like there's too many places to go. But I'll just give you a couple examples here. Places like CISA in the USA, CISA.gov, CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And then there's Shields Up. You can either just Google Shields Up, but has a lot of constant resources that help companies. And Shields Up is spelled SHIELDS-up. Shields Up is a great program that they have on what are the latest threats, what's going on around the world, the attacks that are happening around the world, and what you can do for different size companies. I think certifications are a great answer. I think people need to constantly be learning. We all need to be lifelong learners. So while you have blogs, you have articles, you have books, you have websites, you have threat intelligence services that can constantly be giving you updates and and that kind of thing. But it's really an ongoing challenge. And I would just give one final thing. One thing I do every year on a personal level around the holidays is prediction reports. I write a prediction. These aren't my predictions; these are industry predictions. Reports that would cost, in some cases, $50,000, $100,000 to buy a service from a Gartner or a Forrester. Many of those are given away over the holidays by the top technology companies in these prediction reports. It's not just like, hey, guessing what the weather might be. Some of these are 50, 60, 70-page reports with in-depth analysis of what's really going on behind the scenes in these cyber attacks. I read a ton of them over the holidays. I rank them, and you can just type in security predictions in Google. It'll pop right up as on my Lohrmann on cybersecurity blog. But reading those prediction reports for the coming year, it's not just about guessing the future. It's about learning about trends, learning about best practices, learning about steps you should be taking now, and then constantly refreshing that list. I think that's a really important thing for all of us to be doing. I do that every year, and I basically list them in that predictions report that comes out every December.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think you shared a lot of resources, Dan. And here, it's for the cybersecurity leaders, there is no shortcut or quick fix here. You need to put a lot of work and read and then learn, keep yourself educated, make sure your team is also educated. Well said. So in that, what are some best practices and strategies for conducting regular cybersecurity drills and exercises to ensure readiness and effectiveness, Dan?
Yeah, so let me just share a story again from the book, and then give you 3 or 4 different tips for people that are doing this. And again, I tell the stories because I think the stories bring it to life, and like, why are we doing these things, or why is certain things important? I think in life, in all of us, in any area, it can be in sports, it could be in cybersecurity and technology. We learn lessons. Somebody tells you do this, do that, and then it happens in a game, and it's different. Now it becomes real to you, right? So I'll just go back 20 years, and this isn't a cybersecurity attack, but this was during the large blackout we had in the Northeast. I was the chief information security officer in Michigan government. So the whole Northeast lost power. Probably remember back in August of 2003, and we had an emergency, and everyone had to report to the Emergency Coordination Center. It was a hot summer day in Michigan. We lost power in central Michigan. We lost about 24 hours in Detroit and Some other cities like New York City, it was several days. They had no power anywhere. And so there was a lot of misinformation that was coming in, and people, throwing during tests and exercises, throwing different curveballs at people was important. The news was saying it was another 9/11. It was another terrorist attack. Of course, that was not what happened, but there was all this false information coming out. People were saying things that were true and were not true. We reported to the Emergency Coordination Center, and one thing we saw right away when all these people reported to respond to this major statewide emergency, about half the people initially that we thought were going to show up didn't show up. And then over the next couple of days, it was ended up being a third never showed up. And you may say, well, why did that happen? Well, some of them were on vacation. I mean, the person who was supposed to be in charge, Captain John Ort, was actually on vacation down in Mexico. There was nothing wrong with that. He had a planned vacation. You don't plan for emergencies, cancel vacations because you didn't know this was going to happen, right? So somebody else had to step up, and the person who stepped up did a great job. When they did a great job, they actually became the director of Michigan State Police 10 years later. So, I mean, it was interesting that if you're ready and you're a backup person and you're watching this, you may be called on an emergency. So knowing, what the role is of your boss or if you're the backup person, are you really ready to go in case you're needed? So one thing I tell people during a tabletop exercise or planning a strategy, I walk around the room and tap people on the shoulder and say, a third of the people, you have the rest of the day off, or go back to your office with a little surprise, or you can stand in the back and watch, but you can't use your cell phone. You can't be telling other people what to do because you're not here right now. You're on vacation in Europe and you're not available. And so we're just going to see what happens. Who's your backup? What are they going to do? And that always throws everybody for a curve. They're not ready for that. In fact, they often try to negotiate, like, no, don't pick Frank, pick Sarah, take the student intern, right? We don't want you. He's the person who knows everything. You can't pick him. Well, I just did. He's gone on vacation. Now what are you going to do? I mean, it's always a surprise. And it's funny how people try to negotiate their way out of it. And in a real emergency, you can't negotiate your way out of somebody being on vacation in Europe. So, the reality is, being ready for contingency plans, having a good strategy. Another thing we learned was how you're going to communicate. All the phones were down. You couldn't get now we had GETs. We had emergency phone systems where we got immediate access. But what if your cell phone towers don't work? What if your network is down? What if your email's not working? How are you going to communicate? You think you're going to do it just like regular real time and you plan that way, but you may not. I've also seen organizations that, this is really sad, that when the emergency strikes, their whole plan is encrypted on the network. And so they can't even get to the plan. And so they don't even know who to call. They don't even know who the people are. They don't know the phone numbers. They don't know anything. Why? Because the bad guys, the first thing they did was encrypt all the plans. Everyone thought they were going to be able to access the plan real time on their phones or in their laptops, but now it's not available. So yes, you should have you need to have backup. You need to have your plan somewhere separate from your network so it's available in another place. You need to have alternative communication plans. You need to be ready in these situations. I could go through a long list. There's a lot of other tips in the book, but those are just a few things that people generally aren't prepared for. They think they're ready, but they're not really ready. Think about how you're going to communicate. Everyone says, last thing I'll say on this point, communication is the biggest thing in any emergency, whether it's a cyber emergency, a fire, flood, tornado, natural disaster, hurricane. How are you going to communicate? You can't talk to your people if you can't, and don't just assume the phones and your email is going to work, because it might not. Texting may not work. So you got to have a backup plan. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. I think, preparedness is the key, and also the communication. You made a good point. That kind of reminds me, like many years ago, I was supporting a customer, and then in the emergency situation, I think they didn't have my cell number, maybe 15 years ago. And they actually called my wife to get my cell number, and then called me on the day I was on a board with my friend. And luckily, they can reach me on the one I had a network. I connected through my cell phone to support that. I can connect that with what you said. It's well said, Dan. Coming to this kind of next question is like, how can a leader use lessons learned from the past cybersecurity threats and attacks to continuously improve their organization's preparedness and response capabilities?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be lifelong learners. We got to constantly be assessing. Just because something worked a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago. I mean, I have people, oh yeah, we did a tabletop exercise before COVID. That's not good enough. You need to, you need to be doing this at least annually. Some leading organizations are having semi-annually or even quarterly tabletop exercises. This constantly be assessing the threat situation and updating plans. Constantly be thinking about this. You got to be constantly evolving. In the last question we just mentioned, one of the things that criminals will do is they'll use all these things as phishing attacks. Phishing, PHI phishing, not fishing like eating fish. So people will try and trick people, and they'll try and say, hey, this is your boss. Can you do this? So you can do little exercises to test your people. How will they respond? Is it legit? Is it not? How do we know? How do we verify that this information or this communication between me and my boss or me and my other people on my team is legitimate? How do I know that it's good? So you got to keep asking questions, keep updating, keep improving. Ransomware is changing. The threats are changing. The attacks are changing. When you stop one thing, they're going to try something else. They're often trying to look for the least, the least difficult way to get into your organization. So if you've locked the back door really well, a lot of organizations do this. Here's all the 27 things I've done to protect this one system. And I say, okay, fine, I'm not going against that system. What about this other system over here? Well, we don't have anything on that. We don't have multi-factor authentication over there. We don't have, so a lot of organizations will brag about their best protections on their best systems, but they're not looking at the weaknesses, the least protected systems. Maybe they're not doing MFA for all their system administrators. Maybe there's a back door into those systems. So you got to constantly be looking to your list, to your priorities, just as you do in business, just as the economy changes, interest rates change, what you invest in changes in our financial investments. We think about that. It's different this year than it is last year, maybe different than 2 years ago. The same thing is true in cybersecurity. So you got to constantly be reassessing the situation and saying, okay, that was great 2 years ago. That worked 4 years ago. That worked 10 years ago. Is that going to work today? In some cases, the answer might be yes, but in many cases, it's going to be no. So constantly asking that, looking for, again, as we mentioned earlier, just to recap, talk to your peers, look at case studies and best practices, ask your vendors to give you examples of where they succeeded. Ask for references, talk to the references, look for white papers, look for case studies. It's important. Look for people that have experience and have done this before, and they're going to be the ones that can help you.
Awesome, Dennis. A great points and in depth, and it's a great learning session for all our viewers and cybersecurity leaders. And thank you so much. And here, Dan Lohrmann, the co-author of Cyber Mayday and The Day After. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your insight with all the people here.
Thank you, Senthil. It's great being with you. Have a great day.